Is your warband feeling a bit lacking? Are your mercenaries feeling a little bit bland? Are your witch hunters feeling a little low on numbers? Does your cult need even more variation? Well, fear not, for hired swords are here to fulfill your warband's wildest wants and desires. In my previous videos, I've talked at length about warband building, as well as the strengths and weaknesses of each warband from the main rulebook. There are many ways to build a warband, and Mordheim does a great job of providing a playground for players to exercise their creativity when it comes to roster planning and experiment. With just the handful of different factions in the main rulebook, there's already so much content to play around with and experiment with. But the fun doesn't stop at just these base warbands, for there are even more warbands that have been published over the years, offering a ton of options for players looking to get into the game. However, if we just stick to the main rulebook for the time being, there's another customization option that I've mentioned briefly in the past, but have not yet given a closer look at on the channel. That option is hired swords. Hired swords are freelance warriors that can be hired to add some new strength to your warband. These guys offer great utility that can help fill any gaps in performance that your warband might be suffering from. On top of that, they're just a really cool thing to have. It feels good running around with a band of mercenaries or witch hunters who have an ogre or a fast and deadly elf ranger to help even the playing field against some of the tougher warbands out there. So in this video, I thought I would explain the process of hiring and maintaining a hired sword, go over each hired sword from the main rulebook, and talk about their strengths and weaknesses, and let you know which warbands would benefit most from each type of hired sword. So how does hiring a hired sword work? Well, let's take a look at the rulebook. A warband can recruit a hired sword during initial warband creation or during a campaign in the post-game sequence. Each hired sword has a cost to hire them as well as an upkeep fee. The cost to hire them is paid immediately upon hiring them. So if we look at the Pit Fighter's entry, I need 30 gold crowns to add him to my warband. Now, once he's in my warband, I have secured him for at least one game. However, if I want to keep him in the warband, I must pay 15 crowns after each game. If I'm unable to pay, he'll leave the warband when it comes time to buy or sell equipment or hire new recruits. Now, while you do have to pay to hire and maintain the hired sword, you do not and cannot pay for any equipment they might need. Each hired sword comes with a set loadout, or they might have a few options of equipment. The hired sword does come with a few options. Then you pick what sort of equipment you'd like for them to carry, and that's their loadout for as long as they're in the warband. When adding a hired sword to the roster, add them to the henchman section, as they gain experience in the same way that a henchman does. Hired swords affect warband rating and size a bit differently than standard warriors. Hired swords don't count towards the total size of the warband when calculating warband rating or when selling Weirdstone. So, if my 9 mercenaries hire a pit fighter, I will still refer to the 7 to 9 warrior column when selling Weirdstone. While hired swords don't affect the warband size with regards to income and warband rating, they do affect your route test threshold. So if I have 8 warriors in my warband, I would normally have to make a route test after losing just 2 warriors. But if I hire this pit fighter, that brings me up to 9 warriors, and now I would need to lose 3 to start making route tests instead. When it comes to warband rating, each hired sword increases the rating by a set number plus 1 for each experience points it has earned. So, if I have a warband rating of, say, 100, and I hire this pit fighter, my warband rating goes up to 122. I don't add the additional 5 to my rating like I would for adding another member to my warband. The only number you need to worry about is the number listed in that hired sword's entry. This is the same for all hired swords, including the ogre bodyguard. Normally, adding a large creature, like a rat ogre for the Skaven, or a minotaur for the beastmen, adds an additional 20 to the warband rating, instead of just the normal 5 for another member. This is, however, ignored for something like the ogre bodyguard. Again, like all the hired swords, just pay attention to the number in the rating section for that specific hired sword. Let's talk more about experience. I stated earlier that hired swords gain experience just like henchmen do. So, they don't get extra experience for taking models out of action like a hero would, but they can earn extra experience through other scenario-specific conditions. So if my hired warlock took out a mercenary during the game, they wouldn't get the experience for the kill. However, if we were playing something like the Weirdstone Hunt scenario, if the hired sword picks up a Weirdstone and holds onto it till the end of the game, then they would get the experience for picking up the Weirdstone, which is specific to the Weirdstone Hunt scenario. So we've established that hired swords earn experience just like henchmen, but what if they earn enough experience for an advancement? Well, to make matters more confusing, when a hired sword levels up or gains an advancement, they don't roll on the henchman table, they instead roll on the hero table. So again, they gain experience like henchmen, but they gain advances like heroes. If you roll up a new skill for your hired sword, refer to that specific hired sword's entry, and it states which categories of skills you're allowed to pick from. For characteristic increases, the hired sword entries don't specifically state which racial maximum tables should be used, but it's safe to assume that if the hired sword's name doesn't state what race they are, for example the ogre bodyguard or the halfling scout, then you can use the human profile for determining what their racial maximums are. Finally, we have injuries. When a hired sword is rolling for injuries after a game in which they were taken out, you treat them in exactly the same manner as you would a henchman. So on a 1 or a 2, they die, and on a 3+, they live. Simple as that. So let's quickly recap. Hired swords each have a hiring cost that must be paid to add them to the warband, and an upkeep that must be paid after each battle to ensure they stay in the warband. They gain experience and are injured, just like henchmen, but they gain advances like heroes. They increase the warband rating by a specific number +1 for each experience they've earned. They do not contribute to the number of warriors in your warband when calculating rating or when selling Weirdstone. They do, however, contribute to your total warband size when determining your route threshold. Now that we got all the boring stuff out of the way, let's take a look at each hired sword in order of appearance and talk about why you might want to add one to your warband.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
The pit fighter is a burly melee brawler who earns their keep by competing in bloody competition within the fighting pits of the Empire. When they're not entertaining the unwashed masses, they sometimes offer their unique talents to the highest bidder, which can lead them into the ruins of Mordheim as a hired sword. Their unique weapons and strong physique give them an edge over your average melee fighter. Their melee stats are quite good, especially their strength and toughness, when compared to an average mercenary fighter. Combine that with their 2 base attacks, and you've got yourself quite a strong combatant. In addition to their good stats, you also have some unique equipment. The pit fighter comes equipped with both a Morning Star and a spiked gauntlet. Normally, a warrior cannot wield a second weapon or buckler in combination with the Morning Star, but the pit fighter is an exception. This means he can make up to 2 strength 5 attacks in the first round of combat, which can be completely devastating. Furthermore, he carries the unique spiked gauntlet weapon, which counts as both a sword and a buckler. This means he gets an extra attack with a sword, and can parry and re-roll his parry as per the rules from the buckler. This can help increase his survivability, because he only has the 1 wound. So as good a fighter as this guy is, he still might be outmatched if he's completely outnumbered. Any warband other than Skaven and Undead can hire a pit fighter. So if your warband is lacking some frontline melee power, like if you're a more ranged focused warband, you might want to consider hiring a pit fighter to offer some security. For only 30 gold crowns plus a 15 crown upkeep, you can get yourself some more muscle and a unique combination of weapons to make your games more interesting.
I'm an ogre! I'm a terrifying ogre! Big, stupid, ugly ogre!
The ogre bodyguard is probably the strongest melee fighter in the rulebook. These large, brutish creatures are highly sought after as bodyguards due to their strength and resilience. An ogre has the same strength and toughness as a pit fighter, but he has a massive 6-inch movement, 3 wounds, and he causes fear. This is a huge boon to any warband who could pony up the 80 crown hiring fee, where he can even level the playing field against fear-causing warbands like Undead. However, that 35 gold crown upkeep is gonna really hit your wallet, as sometimes that could be around half the gold you earn from a single win. In my opinion, the biggest bonuses are his speed and number of wounds. Being able to quickly close the distance is great for determining when engagements begin. Having 3 wounds and 2 base attacks is nearly the same as having 2 or 3 extra warriors in the fight. For equipment, an ogre can be equipped with either a double-handed weapon or any combination of 2 one-handed weapons, picking from swords, axes, and clubs. Picking a double-handed weapon can be more of a risk, since you'll always be striking last, but the multiple wounds make it so even if you do strike last, you might still be alive to land your devastating blow. And if you can manage to earn a skill advancement for the ogre, then picking the strongman skill basically means game over for anyone you're facing. Any warband besides Skaven can hire an ogre bodyguard. And if you can afford it, hiring an ogre bodyguard is one of the single largest power spikes a warband can experience.
Gentlemen, we do not stop till nightfall.
What about breakfast?
We've already had it.
We've had one, yes. What about second breakfast?
The halfling scout is one of the best valued henchmen in the game. These small yet bold folk are excellent archers and outstanding cooks, leading to them being highly sought after by mercenaries all across the Empire. For only 15 gold, you're adding a fairly competent ranged combatant to your warband, with a starting ballistic skill of 4. If you get lucky enough to add a few skills to him, your halfling will soon prove to be an MVP in most of your games. A halfling scout comes equipped with a bow, a dagger, and a cooking pot, which serves as a helmet. His low strength and toughness make him more suited for long-range combat, and his low upkeep cost of only 5 gold crowns means you'll barely notice him when it comes time to manage your warband. One of his most valuable assets is the Cook special rule. He allows you to increase your warband's maximum size by 1. This is crucial for a warband like witch hunters, who are stuck at a maximum warband size of 12. Sisters of Sigmar, witch hunters, and mercenaries can all hire a halfling scout. Halfling scouts are definitely not to be slept on, otherwise you might wind up with an arrow in your eye.
What manner of man are you that can summon up fire without flint or tinder?
I am an enchanter.
Warlocks are probably the most game-changing hired swords. And yes, my model is more of a necromancer, as he comes from my undead warband, but he works anyway. These sorcerers and mystics are wise to the chaotic energies of the universe, and are often sought after by mercenaries despite the ravings of the cult of Sigmar. These warriors are not the best fighters, with stats comparable to a Youngblood or a Dreg, but they get access to the lesser magic table. These are some of the most versatile and powerful spells in the game, and since they get to start with 2 spells from the list, your warlock will be wildly different every time you hire one. Depending what spells you roll up, you could wind up with a highly mobile sniper, a close-ranged battle wizard, or a combination of both. I once had a warlock who could cast Flight of Zimmeran and Sword of Rezabel. This allowed him to conjure a flaming sword into his hand, and then fly into buildings through windows to stab away at people inside. Since the warlock comes equipped with just a staff, which uses the rules of a club, your spells are definitely your best asset. Naturally, witch hunters and Sisters of Sigmar cannot hire a warlock, as they take a firm stance against magic. However, if you are allowed to hire one, then the 30 gold crown hiring cost, plus the 15 crown upkeep, is a small price to pay for the added fun and versatility that a warlock has to offer.
Who are you?
We are the knights who say...
No, not the knights who say nay.
The same.
The freelancer is probably the most unique of all the hired swords. Freelancers are desperate nobles who've been denied the fine life of an aristocrat and are instead forced to subsidize their meager inheritances with mercenary work. The freelancer has decent combat stats, falling somewhere between a pit fighter and your average mercenary hero. He comes equipped with heavy armor, a sword, and a shield. This means that he'll be quite tanky, but since he's wearing armor and carrying a shield, he'll be slower than your average warrior. That is, while he's on foot. This brings me to his most unique feature. Not only does he come with the equipment I've described, but he also comes with a warhorse and a lance. His lance allows him to make a strength 6 attack when he charges, and with the warhorse's ridiculous 16-inch charge range, it's likely that you'll be charging pretty often. Furthermore, the warhorse is allowed to make an attack of its own each turn, so it's like having a second fighter in the mix. On top of all that, the freelancer's armor save goes from a 4+ to a 3+ while mounted, giving him some much-needed durability to make up for his average toughness. Only mercenaries and witch hunters are allowed to hire a freelancer, for no knight would stoop low enough to serve anyone unworthy of his stature. His cost is fairly high at 50 crowns, plus 20 crowns for upkeep. Not to mention that if you're going to run him efficiently, you'll probably need a model for a mounted version and unmounted as well. But if you can afford to hire him, then a freelancer will add some greatly needed mobility and frontline power to your warband.
What do your elf eyes see?
The Uruks turn northeast! They're taking the hobbits to Isengard!
The Elf Ranger is a highly mobile ranged combatant that comes with very unique special skills. Elves are creatures of Fey origin who hail from the forests of the Empire and are often distrusted by humans. However, their skill with the bow and their natural perception makes them highly sought after by those venturing into Mordheim. Elf Rangers come with a movement of 5 and an initiative of 6. This makes them great at darting around the battlefield and climbing up to high places. Their ballistic skill of 5 makes them the best range unit in the game. They come equipped with an elven bow, giving them a crazy 36-inch range when shooting. They also have a sword and the unique elven cloak, which causes incoming missile attacks to be made with -1 to their roll. The Elf Ranger has a few special rules that makes them even more valuable. Excellent Sight allows the elf to spot hidden enemies at twice his initiative value, which can be useful in certain situations. However, it's the Seeker special rule that really steals the show. During exploration, when rolling the dice, the Elf Ranger is allowed to adjust the value of one die by plus or minus 1. This means you could potentially earn more Weirdstone shards, or turn any multiples you rolled on the exploration chart into higher valued rolls. For example, in this roll, I could either turn these dice into a 444, or if I keep the 5, I could perhaps turn it into a 55. This means finding more valuable locations during exploration. The elf also has access to a pair of special skills when advancing. The Fey skill allows them to ignore incoming spells on a 4+, and the Luck skill allows them to re-roll any die roll once per game. All of this put together makes the Elf Ranger quite a valuable member, both on and off the battlefield. If you can foot the bill of 40 crowns plus 20 crowns for upkeep, then you'll probably find that the elf begins to pay for himself, if not in gold, then with the blood of your enemies.
Come, Gimli! We're gaining on them!
I'm wasted on cross-country. We dwarves are natural sprinters. Very dangerous over short distances.
The final hired sword in the rulebook is the fanatical dwarf troll slayer. These psychopathic killers are often disgraced or dishonored members of the dwarven race who have sworn an oath to seek death in combat to atone for their misdoings. This makes them more than willing to sign on with a band of desperate treasure seekers and venture into the streets of Mordheim. Troll slayers are slower than most, with a movement of 3, but they have several other benefits that make up for this. Their survivability is one of their strong suits. They have a toughness of 4, plus the hard to kill special rule, which means they're only taken out on an injury roll of 6, treating 5 as stunned. They also have hard head, which helps them ignore the concussion special rule that certain weapons like clubs have. Combine that with their Death Wish special rule, which lets them ignore all psychology and all alone tests, and the Troll Slayer can take some serious punishment. The Troll Slayer comes equipped with either 2 axes or a double-handed weapon, so you'll have to make a judgment call when hiring him. Like the elf, the Dwarf Troll Slayer has a few special skills available when advancing. Ferocious Charge doubles his attacks when charging, but confers a -1 to his to-hit rolls. Monster Slayer makes it so he will always wound on a 4+, unless his strength would let him wound on an even lower number. This skill is amazing for fighting high-toughness creatures. His final skill, Berserker, lets him add +1 to his attack rolls when he charges. The Troll Slayer is only available to mercenaries and witch hunters. For only 25 gold plus 10 gold upkeep, this guy can turn into an absolute monster if you hold on to him for a while, and he can be a great way to add some much needed melee power to your front line. One last note on the final 2 hired swords that I mentioned, the Elf Ranger and the Dwarf Troll Slayer. Elves and dwarves basically can't stand each other. Because of this, if your warband contains any members of the rival race, then the upkeep cost of the hired sword is doubled. So, if I have a Dwarf Troll Slayer in my warband, and I hire an elf, then both of their upkeep costs are doubled. Furthermore, if I have an all-dwarf warband, and I hire an elf, then his upkeep costs will be doubled. Elves and dwarves are just so unwilling to spend time in each other's company that you're going to have to compensate them quite heavily. And that's it. Those are all the hired swords from the main rulebook. These additions can help add a little more flavor to your warband while also filling potential skill gaps that you might have. Whenever I add a hired sword to my warband, I usually give them the same name each time, no matter which warband is controlling them. It's kind of like I treat them like recurring characters in a story that show up from time to time. This leads to some interesting and often hilarious lore developing for each hired sword, like my legendary sniper Billy Buckwheat. Billy was there with my witch hunters during our map campaign. He served a tour with the Sisters of Sigmar during the Procession of More narrative campaign, and he continues to be a complete menace in our ongoing open campaign. I'll never forget the time that he survived being hunted down by 2 Avalanders. The 2 mercenaries had him cornered atop his sniper's roost. Billy then took a miraculous 4-inch jump to evade them. The mercenaries then followed, both of them jumping down, and one of them being taken out by the fall. Instead of trying to outrun the man, Billy made the bold decision to turn around while he was clearly in charge range, and swiftly took the man out with a well-aimed shot. Hopefully you will have some equally legendary moments for your hired swords in your games. If the hired swords in the rulebook aren't enough for you, then more can be found in secondary publications, all of which can be found on broheim.net. There are merchants, assassins, highwaymen, and even more wild options when you go into the unofficial and experimental categories. So thanks for sticking around for another video. I look forward to making more and growing the community here on YouTube. And most of all, I hope you play more Mordheim, and I hope you have fun.